who could answer us definitively if the universe had a creator or if it existed forever and ever. It appears that the information about the existence of a higher mind ruling the cosmic order is subliminal and cannot be proven. If the universe was created by someone, that someone didn't want the questions about our origin to be answered in space-time during our entire stay here, you would have to die to get answers, and even then, you would have no guarantees that you would get them. However, the intuition of the existence of this higher mind is a universal phenomenon. During the storms of the cave age, we tried to seek refuge and protection from imaginary and omnipotent beings, whom we called gods. It is our memory that places us outside the real time of observed events. Everything around us is seen as it looked in the past. In the case of distant galaxies, this past is long and can tend to infinity. At the other extreme, as is the case with subatomic particles, it can be ephemeral and negligible. But, even so, it will be past, and it will also tend to infinity. What we see, directly, is not the universe, but its image and likeness. Even in the face of our impotence to have definitive answers, the union between philosophy and science could reduce the distances that separate us from reality. Let's look at the concept of black holes. This mysterious entity, capable of retaining even light, can only be deduced indirectly. It would cause gravitational changes around it by bending light like a gravitational lens. Light, in this case, would be acting as if it were the messenger of space, which would be outside the translation process. In order to know about the existence of space, we would be dependent on the information that light carries. It's what tells us, indirectly, that the black hole would have curved space. If we think about the unfolding of the uncertainty principle, according to which particles cannot be observed directly, why shouldn't one think that the real universe could be part of a huge and single black hole, capable of transiently retaining the informations? Of course, this would be a condition supported by our memory. That is, the universe would be contained in a black hole, just because we cannot directly observe it. If you see the sun 8 minutes late, it is reasonable to think that our star would have a dark companion, which, in this case, would be the sun itself. The problem is the observer, and not the universe. Physicists assume that there would be another different star, gravitationally interacting with the sun, called Nemesis. After having created paradise, a place of delight, it seems that the Creator would have, momentarily, set this part of his creation aside, and focused his attention on the observer, who would also be part of the whole. It is as if, before being endowed with a memory, we were alienated in paradise, wandering from one place to another. Everything was very beautiful, but we had no way of knowing it consciously. So, what good would creation be if there was no one who could admire it? Some biblical texts approach this aspect in a subtle way. They tell us that, in the beginning, it was only darkness, and then, God would have created light. And God saw that the light was good, and separated the light from the darkness. That is, God had to promote the separation between light and darkness, because even if the light was there, it could not manifest itself. It is known that, in its natural form, light could not be directly apprehended by our limited senses, until it was packaged or quantized in the form of a photon. This photon is what tells us that the stars shine in the distance, and, thanks to it, we can say that they actually exist. If the problem were at the level of information, rather than space, darkness would not necessarily have to be a description of an empty and dark place. The light would be there, even if it couldn't be seen. The photon is what defines what is and what is not in darkness, which highlights the role of our consciousness. Science believes that only 10% of the total matter in the universe is lit. The essential tool used by the Creator to feed our memory would be time. The condition imposed would be that the universe of creation remained outside of time, and we exiled within it. Once endowed with the ability to remember what we've seen around us, we could no longer imagine that there could be anything outside of time. Therefore, time would be an intrinsic and negative movement, and that would depend on our point of view. That is, time would be contained within ourselves by a principle of exclusion of direct access to what might exist outside. If our memory binds us to what would already be in our past, what was out of time would be, relatively, placed in our future. Theoretically, you could move relatively in time without leaving your physical position in space. That is, by being exiled in time, you would remain in paradise, even if that place was beyond your direct reach. Though this is a limited and crude comparison, imagine space-time as a birthday balloon. Empty, it would be reduced to a two-dimensional surface with only width and length. If you inflated the balloon, it would add a third dimension, represented by time. Or, if you prefer, for the depth. After inflating the balloon of our consciousness, the Creator's next step would be to place us in the center of this bubble of information, while the balloon expanded. For this, space would have to become virtually two-dimensional, or flat. This is achieved by taking time and depth away, and virtually nullifying the balloon's expansion, even if the information about it was still there. Without time, our memory could not record, directly, the balloon's inflation. The apparent flatness of space would be the only condition that would allow the observer to be placed over the center, along with all the galaxies he could observe. By quantizing or packaging the light so that it was separated from space and darkness, the record of this balloon inflation would have been nullified in the process by the contraction of time. That is, even if the balloon inflation was there and the space still remained curved, it could not be recorded directly. During the flattening of space, there would be a dangerous approximation between the ultraviolet and the infrared due to the virtual polarization of light by time suppression. This apparent polarization is the same one we see projected into the night sky, and that would give dubious support to the Doppler effect. It can be seen that the inflation of the space-time balloon would be a condition prior to the emergence of our consciousness, as it would be part of the negative structuring of our temporal memory. Therefore, it is said that the real arrow of time would always point to our future. For its part, our memory tells us that there is only what is in our past, or what can be remembered. Our memories would then be accompanied by an apparent reversal in the direction of the arrow of time. By fusing space and light in an apparent way, as if they formed a continuous whole, the Creator would make clear His intention to leave us definitively isolated in space-time. Not as a form of punishment, but so that we could interact with the matter. This virtual flattening of space, and the late projection of information onto the celestial vault, which gives us the feeling of being at the center of the universe, would have caused the greatest confusion in our way of evaluating space through light. The inflation of the balloon of our consciousness would be the product of negative work, resulting from the packaging of light in the form of a photon. Even if the quantization process could take time, in our future, light would have assumed the characteristics of continuous waves in our past, or soon after its scattering. This was due to the virtual suppression of time, and, consequently, the suppression of the depth of space. The timelessness of the quantization phase was first demonstrated by Bove and Geiger in 1925. When a quantum collides with a free electron, both appear simultaneously. The consequence is that the spacetime balloon seems to continually inflate in our past, although this happens outside the real time of inflation itself. The reason would be the fixed and limited speed of light, acting as a messenger from space. Finally, there is the aspect of the forces involved during the inflation of our spacetime balloon. The incompatibility we detect between the micro and macro structure of the universe is illusory. This is easy to see when you keep in mind that the two levels of matter depend on the same form of remote tracking of light. We see an electron because it emits or reflects some kind of radiation or light. The same is true for stars and planets. In order for the Creator to keep us isolated from other observers, and at the center of the information bubble, represented in a birthday balloon, the contraction of time would need to have been suspended to infinity. Things would work something like this. When you stretch an inflated balloon, it would tend towards its original two dimensions, width and length. Time, represented in the air that inflates the balloon, would tend to contract. In the process, there would be an increase in potential energy. You would stretch the elastic in one direction, and the force would point in the opposite direction. The cat's leap would have been to sustain the contraction of time to infinity, which physics predicts would happen at the subatomic level of matter. The observer cannot get out of his temporal prison because he cannot measure time from certain limits of its contraction. It's just that, in order to see the particles, the observer has to light them with shorter and shorter wavelengths. There is a technical limit to this. In the macrostructure of the universe, the same thing would happen with time dilation. Thus, the act of inflating the balloon and deflating it would be trends that would have been suspended to infinity, keeping us captive in the center of the information bubble. The universe of spacetime will not expand forever and will not collapse, because, at least from our point of view, both inflation and the contraction of space would be limited by the contraction of time at subliminal levels. Outside our memory, the universe would tend to its state of rest, where time would not exist or could not be measured directly. This, unfortunately, could not be confirmed or denied. The only one who has the answer is the Creator.